Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Let's Talk Quality, the podcast. We're back for season 2. And today I'm very, very excited and honored to be joined by Irving Ford. Irving is the current Vice President of Quality for Adaptimmune. And it's a really exciting time for both Irving and Adaptimmune as they've recently received approval for their engineered T-cell for solid tumour Tecelra. Irving is one of the rare individuals in the world that has gone through 4 BLAs for cell therapies. He's a fantastic leader. A lot of people have said you have to get Irving onto the show, so I'm very excited to have him on. I hope everyone enjoys the show. Let's get into it.
Right, Irving, welcome to Let's Talk Quality, the podcast. How are you doing?
I am well. Thank you for having me today.
My pleasure, Irving. Listen, I've given you a bit of an introduction, but if you could give the listeners a high-level overview of who you are, that would be great, and then we'll get into it.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Irving Ford, and I am currently the VP of Quality at Adaptimmune, which is a cell therapy company who recently just received approval from the FDA for our first engineered T-cell for solid tumors for synovial sarcoma, Tecelra. And I'm glad to be here today. And I just want to let everybody know that the views and opinions that I express today are those of my own and not of Adaptimmune nor of my previous employers.
Absolutely. Well, it's an incredibly exciting time. Thank you for joining. And I know that you're probably working all sorts of hours and non-stop. So thank you first and foremost, Irving, to take the time to talk about. I suppose you'll talk about your journey in quality, and there's some incredible things that we want to go through and talk about that have led you to where you are now. I suppose let's start right at the beginning. How did you get into science in the beginning, and then how did you sort of transition into the quality assurance realm?
I think, like probably most people in quality, I actually started wanting to become a doctor. So I started my career in pre-med, and once I started taking my college courses, I actually took a microbiology course and I fell in love with microbiology. And I was like, oh, I can actually do this and probably make just as much money as I would being a doctor. So I started my career being a microbiologist. I actually started in a hospital in a clinical lab. So I worked for some reference lab testing clinical samples for a while, and then I made the transition into the pharmaceutical. So my first job from actually the clinical side into the pharmaceutical side was for a generic pharmaceutical company. I actually started on the floor doing environmental monitoring, the typical routine testing that you would do at a pharmaceutical company. But it was interesting because you get to see a lot when you're working in a generic pharmaceutical company because you have all types of solids, liquids, semi-solids, ointments. And you get to see a lot more things than you would in a sterile manufacturing facility. So I think it was a good groundwork for me to understand what should and should not be from a quality standpoint. And then I worked my way up to being a supervisor. I realized that I was a people person. So I was offered a job as a people leader, made that transition into a people leader. And from there, I just continued to work my way up in the industry. I think I've worked in every aspect of pharmaceuticals that exist currently. And that's how I started my career, and that's how I've ended up where I am now. I think I'm unique in that I'm probably one of the VPs of quality who's actually started on the bench and worked my way up and worked in every aspect of quality to get to where I am today.
I want to just lean into that, like a bit about you realize you're a people person, and that's a unique talent. It's not something that necessarily can be trained, or it could be trained, but how did you realize that in the first place? How did you realize that? Was it you that realized that, and how did that sort of transition into, I suppose, the leadership side of things go?
I think it's twofold. I think you have to, first of all, have a desire to want to help people. And I think that's one of the gifts that I have is I'm very passionate about developing and helping people. I'm a giver, so I like to give. I will give my shirt off my back to somebody in need. And I think when you have that talent, you kind of have to then nurture that talent through leadership courses, leadership training. And it was, I won't say it was a natural, but it's something that you have to have a foundation and then you begin to build on those learnings. You constantly have to, I always tell my team, I'm always trying to be a better leader. So you always have to constantly develop your leadership skills because once you stop and think that you have made it, you have not. And I like to read a lot of leadership books, such as the 5 Levels of Leadership, where you start at the bottom and you have to work your way up, except every time you start a new job, you again go back to the bottom. But because you learn all these skill sets or the other experiences that you have, you quickly move up again. And it's all about building trust with people. If you don't build trust with people, then you can never be an effective leader.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point about just continuous development as well. A lot of people, when you get into that leadership role, whether it's a manager, director, VP position, it doesn't just stop there.
No.
Culture is continuously evolving. Company cultures, the industry, the development of various regulations. So it's really important to put yourself into a position where you think that you're not the finished product, I suppose. And it sounds like you have done that for yourself, but also for the people that you're developing underneath you.
And correct. And also as the generations change, because
Yeah.
as you become a leader or as you continue to develop your leadership skills, you get different levels of generations in your organization, and you have to be able to deal effectively with each from Gen X to Gen Z or whatever gen is coming next. You have to be able to effectively communicate with those people, understand their needs, and work with them on their development needs, because their development needs are going to be drastically different than somebody who's been in the industry for 30 years or say versus somebody who just walked into the industry. And of course, their demands are going to be different. You have a lot of them who want to work hybrid. They want to work from home. They think that they're much smarter than everybody else. So it's dealing with that whole dynamic of who they are versus who you are as a leader, and coming together on a common ground to make sure that everybody's successful in the organization.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll get into a bit more about your leadership side of things in a bit, but I suppose you started off in the micro side of things, QC. You were an manager, QC manager or micromanager, associate director, and then you transitioned into the wider quality position or leadership role. When was that? Was your first role in quality at wider quality BMS? And have I got that correct?
No, correct. My first wider role in quality was at BMS. However,
Fine.
when you're working in QC, it's a part of the quality unit. So you're really a part of quality. You just don't have the final decision making.
Yeah.
So I always encourage people, if you want to go from QC into QA, you should really, while you're in QC, learn all the aspects of a QA role. So during my career, I've actually done that. Even though I worked in QC, I always reviewed batch records. I always learned how to do lot release. I always did some cross-functional rotations to make sure I learned all the aspects of the QA role as well while I was in QC, because we interact very closely. The QC group and the QA group are joined at the hip. So you learn a lot of the QA aspects, but it's a matter of making sure that you understand that now you go from, you are the final decision maker in QC, but now you have the final decision making for release of the product. So those are the difference between the two. So you always have an impact on the quality based on QC, but in the QA role, you actually have a final impact on release of the final drug product.
Yeah, I mean, I speak to so many QC professionals, whether they're managers, directors, that would like to take that step into quality or a wider quality position. Are there any, apart from sort of what you just said, is I suppose integrating yourself and learning QA whilst you're doing the job? Did you proactively go about doing that yourself? How did you figure out that this is what I want to do, and how did you go about that? Because not everyone will get that opportunity, I suppose, depending on the organization that you're working in.
Yeah, some people think it's a natural progression, but I think I believe you always have to be intentional about your own career development, and that's one of the things that I like to tell my direct reports, is that your career development is that you have to own it. So when I became a microbiologist, I made sure that I was intentional about learning every aspect of microbiology. I want to be in consumables, I want to be in sterols, I want to be in non-sterols. And then when I came to cell therapy, I was like, I want to learn everything I can about micro. And in that learning, I also realized that I needed to learn everything from a QC standpoint as well as from a quality assurance standpoint, because most people think it's a natural progression. If you're in QC, you're automatically going to go into QA, but that's not the case. You have to be intentional about it. And a lot of times when you're interviewing and you are in QC and you want to go to QA, the interviewer will always say, well, QC is really not QA, even though it's a part of the quality unit. So you really have to make sure that you're intentional, that you get all those things and understand the lingo when you're in an interview, so you can really talk to the QA aspect of it, even though you're in QC.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and like I said, there's a lot of people that are in that position right now, so I'm sure that would be that's helpful advice for a lot of people. Let's talk through your career then. So when you look back at your career, and you've obviously achieved a lot, when you, particularly in the sort of recent, let's say, 10 years, are there any certain points that you see, wow, this was a really pivotal time in my learning and development that has almost accelerated your career to where you are now?
I think it was in a role when I was working for a company and I was the head of micro, and the department needed to be rebuilt from the ground up pretty much. The team had to be reorganized. The lab had to be rebuilt. We were introducing electronic batch records, electronic LIMS at the time. And
Yeah.
I think that was one of the challenging roles for me, and I was successful in it. And at the same time, the head of the chemistry department left. And my
Right.
boss came to me and said, "Oh, Irving, because you did such a great job in getting the micro team up to speed, I actually want you to manage both analytical and micro now." So it was a major challenge for me, and it was a major challenge with integrating the two teams because, in micro, you have to work on the weekends, and analytical, they're pretty much Monday through Friday. So it was pretty much, how do I now merge these two teams together and make them feel like they're a team without them being upset with each other? Because the analytical group would say, "Hey, we don't need to work on the weekends." The micro group was like, "Well, we have to work on the weekends, so I think you need to work on the weekends." So I think it was a turning point for me because that really challenged my leadership and how
Mm,
to build an effective team, and just working with people and trying to understand, how could I do this and how could I make this work without anybody being felt left out, and having to choose to say, "Okay, I want you guys to go out as a team,
mm,
here's some money, go out, have lunch, come back to me and tell me how we can make this team work together as a unified organization." So that
mm.
was a turning point for me because I realized that it could actually be done. You actually need to involve the people in the process. And when you involve the people in the process, it takes it to a totally different level because now they feel like they were a part of building this process, and it wasn't me coming in and say, "You must do
Yeah.
this and this is how I want you to do it." So that
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
turning point in my life, and it made me realize that not only could I be successful in leading one team, I could also move into leading another team, whereas I didn't have the necessary foundational knowledge about analytical at that point. But I
Yeah.
made it my business to go in and learn every assay that they were running so that I could understand what I was actually reviewing. And that's one of the things I tell people in quality all the time, is that you can't really have quality oversight of a process that you really don't have a foundational knowledge about. So if
Mm,
you want to be an effective quality person, you should at least have a foundational knowledge of everything that you're being a quality person for.
mm. It sounds like throughout your career, you've put yourself in a position of not necessarily uncomfortable, but positions where you've not necessarily been an expert, and you've taken on remits which have then helped you expand your career to take on a bigger job. Would that be fair in saying?
That is correct. I,
Yeah.
I think somebody said once, if you take a new job and you're not nervous about taking that new job, it's probably not the right job for you. If you
Mm,
don't feel like you're going to be challenged, if you don't have some sense of, "Oh, did I make the right decision? Is this really the right job for me?" Then it's probably not the right job for you, because I think you have to continue to push yourself and evolve, especially in this industry when there are all the new technologies coming out. And if you want to
yeah.
continue to be successful and evolve, you have to evolve as well in every
Yeah.
aspect of the business.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think in goes for a careers in life in general. I think
Mhm.
if you're too comfortable, you can easily end up cruising through and become stagnant in your career.
Exactly.
I was in a company for 10, 11 years, and felt like I was getting to sort of that point, and decided to set my own business up. And that's been the best decision that I made, because it's putting myself, I was so scared, but putting myself in a position which is uncomfortable has
Yep.
helped progress me. So yeah, I completely agree. So okay, so then was BMS. So BMS was your first wider quality role.
Yes.
And I've had guests and friends of yourself that on this show. Jake Trees did a great
Uh-huh.
episode of the story with the Beckmer and Brianzi, and that was really really fascinating to listen to. You obviously played a huge part in that. How was that sort of part of your career when you look back at your time with BMS?
Well, I actually started with Celgene. So it was
Celgene,
Celgene
sorry,
before it
yes.
became BMS. And I
Yeah.
was actually the first person hired for the cell therapy facility. And I had actually
Okay.
had to build the entire team. So it
Amazing.
was very, again, it was going back to previous experience where I had also had to do that before. So you build on your previous experience. So
Mm.
just bringing in, of course, it's cell therapy. So a lot of people, there are not a lot of people who have experience in cell therapy. So during the interview process is defining what you're really looking for. And what I was really looking for is the culture, because I think when you have the
Mm.
right culture and you bring in the right people, then you build the right skill sets and you can be successful in that organization. So it was very good for me in getting to build a team from the ground up and also transferring in all the technology from the other locations and
Mm.
going from clinical to commercial and interacting with all the regulatory agencies and having to modify the facility at some point. It was very challenging and very interesting at the same time. So again, I think it's
Yeah.
one of those things that you put in your foundation and say, oh, I have something else now that I can rely on. And this is another stepping block for me. So when I move into my next opportunity, I can
Mm.
look back and say, this is what I did and this is what helped me,
Yeah.
and understand these were the things I need to look out for. What were the problem areas? What were the things that are really going to be a challenge in your next opportunity, and how do you overcome those things and how to use that in building your next opportunity, getting into your next career opportunity.
Mm. Yeah. So let's talk about that then. So you spent some time at Celgene, then BMS, and you've
Mhm.
been at Adaptimmune for now coming up to 3 years. Is that about right?
Almost.
Almost 3 years. Excellent. So, what a journey that you've been through with some, incredible achievement most recently. I suppose what I'd like to talk about is that the journey, the last 3 years, how that journey's been. Obviously, you are an example of someone who's been through the commercialization of a cell therapy and then joined a company who has, every company that are in clinical development wants someone who's got experience in scaling up and going in for a BLA and commercializing a cell therapy. And there's obviously not many people that have done or been involved in that sort of process. So I suppose when you look, when you, when you talk about your journey, and you look back at the last 3 years, what have been the key kind of challenges that you've had to navigate in scaling up into a commercial world, a commercial cell therapy setting? How did you go about things like integrating QMS, getting the right size, making it phase appropriate, building your structures and teams? And I know there's a lot in there, but I suppose if you had to kind of pinpoint a few of the key building blocks challenges, it would be great to hear that.
I think, and I'm speaking in generalities here, I think for
Of course.
each cell therapy company, I think it's a unique experience, but I think the key thing with all cell therapy companies and going from clinical to commercial is making sure you have the right data set, making sure you have the appropriate people who understand how to write sections of a BLA, the appropriate people who know how to respond to the FDA, who know how to interact with the FDA and other regulatory bodies. So I think, again, it goes back to building the right team and understanding what is going to be needed from going from a clinical to a commercial facility. I think each company is different, but each company has to have the same foundational network when it comes to following a cell therapy product. Because as you know, cell therapy is unique, especially autologous cell therapy.
Mm.
Each patient is actually its own lot. So understanding the differences between clinical requirements versus commercial requirements,
Yeah.
making sure that people understand all of that. And I think it's I tell people all the time that you kind of have to unlearn everything that you learned, especially if you've been in sterile manufacturing when you come into cell therapy, because it's very unique in that you're actually dealing with the patient and you actually have the patient life in your hand
Mm.
as you're processing it. So once that leukapheresis happens and that patient apheresis material comes into your facility, you actually have the life of that patient in hand, because with cell therapy, this is for a lot of products, this is their last chance for life. And you really want to make sure that you're doing it right, but you also have to understand that you're always operating in the gray. So that's the one thing about cell therapy companies, that from a quality standpoint, nothing is really black and white. You have the FDA accepted guidelines, you have the EU ATMP guidelines, you have Annex 1. So how do you really merge and blend those things together so that you can effectively, especially from a cost standpoint, release a quality product while understanding there are going to be a lot of things that are variable, such as the patient material. With a lot of times with apheresis material, cell therapy products, the patient material can actually come in contaminated. So how do you really deal with that from a quality standpoint? How do you make real-time decisions on the floor? Because when a deviation happens for a cell therapy product, you have to do it in real time. It has to be on the floor. There's no 45 days like you normally have for a deviation. There's no 30-day turnaround. So how do you really train people to get into that mindset of understanding that, hey, we need to do this in real time, and you have to have your SMEs ready and on point to get to a decision and make a decision quickly? And a lot of people are not comfortable with that. A lot of people are not comfortable with being able to make that decision and make that decision quickly and on the spot. So you really have to make sure that you build the right team with the right quality mindset and understand that in cell therapy, it is a gray world, and you're not always going to be able to comply with
Yeah.
everything you would
Yeah.
normally have thought you were supposed to comply with in other aspects of the pharmaceutical industry.
That working in the grey is very much a mindset shift, isn't it? And you building your team, obviously everyone wants people that have worked in cell therapy, but there aren't huge amounts of people that have got hands-on cell therapy experience. So when you were building your team, did you, if you couldn't find these people with cell therapy backgrounds, obviously that would be the goal, but how do you go about training the mindset of people that you build into your team? Like, is that's got to be something that has never, it's not something that is in the handbook, is in the learning of a quality leader. So it's kind of, it's probably learning as you go, I'd imagine, and learn
It
from your mistakes.
it is learning as you go, and I encourage people to. There are a lot of PDA is a great resource. I mean, PDA has a lot of ATMP resources. They have a lot of ATMP conferences, and interacting with other people in the field and really being out there. That's one of the things that I intentionally do. I'm a member of the ATMP advisory board for PDA. I am a member of most of all the planning committees that are really for the ATMP conferences and PDA, FDA. I mean, it's just a lot of interaction and getting that face-to-face time with the FDA, and because it's a new learning for the regulatory bodies as well. So cell therapy is a new thing for everybody, even from the manufacturer to the FDA to the regulatory body. So all of us are learning at the same time. So being able to have those conversations and those dialogues with the regulatory body, and also help them to understand what happens when you're running a cell therapy facility, because sometimes people write guidelines and regulations and they have no understanding of what actually happens in the manufacturing process. So it's incumbent upon us, the manufacturers and those in quality in this industry, to really get out and help to influence and try to help to write and model those guidances that are coming out for cell therapy. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a product that nobody can afford, because it's going to be so cost prohibitive that you can't even make it without transferring that cost onto the patient, which is what we don't want to do. So we really want to make sure that we're making a product that's quality and compliant, but also making sure that we don't overdo it so that the cost is so high that nobody can afford the medication.
So scaling up and going through a BLA, from an emotional and mindset sort of perspective, as you're the leader of the quality assurance for the quality unit, how does that lead up in the last year, for example? How does that look on a practical sense? Like, how many hours are you working? Are you getting any sleep? How's your relationships with your family? What because that's such there's something that just gets overlooked, is like the amount of time and effort that goes into this that could have a effect on your mindset and your mental health and your physical energy and all of that sort of stuff. How have you dealt with all of this over the last year?
It is, and with each cell therapy product comes a different set of challenges, emotionally, physically. So I think you have to have me time. I think you have to make time for me, because I always tell people being a people leader is not as joyful as it seems, because it's very stressful. It takes a lot of your emotion, because when you're a people leader, you have to deal with more than just saying, hey, this is my direct report. Sometimes those people have personnel issues, and you have to become a counselor at times. You have to become a mentor at times. You have to become just a friend at times. You need to hold somebody's hands at times. And all of that happens while you're filing a BLA, because people, especially if they haven't done it before, it's easy for them to get overwhelmed, and it becomes very stressful for them. And now you as the leader have to jump in and say, hey, it's going to be okay. I've been through this before. This is why it's going to be okay. So no need to stress over it. Yes, this is a problem, but it's a problem that the agency understands. We can work through it. This is what they're expecting. This is how we need to respond, and it's going to be okay. So I'm like the calming voice. I'm one of those weird people where operate best when I'm stressed and challenged. And I have a sense of calmness about it. And
Yeah.
sometimes that people mistake that to say I'm not interested or I don't care, but it's because I think because I spend a lot of time in my quiet place and trying
Mm.
to keep my mind settled and understand what's really happening without just letting it overwhelm me at the time. I think it gives me that sense of calmness, whereas I do care, but I don't have to be spastic about caring.
Yeah.
And sometimes people don't understand that. Like, how can you be so calm in the midst of this? We're about to file a BLA and everything is hectic, and here you are smiling and calm. So yeah, it's one of those interesting
Yeah,
things that
it's like you're clearly a naturally calm. You have calm demeanor about you, which is important as a leader. Not to be seen or as you could be panicking and everything could be going over your head. You could feel overwhelmed inside, but you can't show that on an outward front to your team.
and
'Cause
sometimes you do have to show it because they want to know that you're human. Sometimes they want to see, hey, do you have any
yeah,
emotions? Is anybody in there? Do you understand what I'm going through?
yeah,
It's like, yeah, I mean, I've actually had meetings where I've actually cried in front of my staff, and I think sometimes they find that shocking because I tell them that sometimes leaders have to make themselves vulnerable because people really don't care how much you know until they know that you care about them. And sometimes when people are going through things, it actually does affect me. And if they're crying, I mean, I'm emotional as well, so I
yeah,
cry with you. And I think that's one of the things that helps me to build great relationships of trust with people because they see that I actually care and that I can share my emotions and I'm not this VP of quality, this high person that
yeah,
they can't talk to. I remember when I started having skip level meetings with some of my staff at other companies, they're like, oh, we've never talked to the VP before. We never talked to the leader before. And I'm like, what? Why not? I'm just another man. And I think
yeah,
people need to see that and understand that you're just a human, just like they are,
yeah,
even regardless of your title, that you're there to support them and encourage them.
yeah. No, I completely agree. And so looking ahead now, what are you excited about? Because you're obviously transitioning into a very different phase for the organization and your role and what that entails. Does that now require a different sort of skill set within your team structure? How do you move into that sort of commercial world and keep the culture, I suppose, in that not from changing overnight, I suppose.
So I tell people moving from clinical to commercial is a different mindset because in clinical, everything is different because in clinical, it's not as stringent necessarily as a commercial operation. You're really now trying to make sure you can get as many patients through as possible. You're really trying to control costs. You're
Yeah,
really trying to do continuous improvement. So now it's all about the Six Sigma, the lean activities. How do we make things better? How do we make things shorter? Can we improve our analytical testing? Can we improve the way we do environmental monitoring? Can we improve pretty much every aspect of the business? You're constantly looking for continuous improvements when you're looking for that in the clinical world, but it's even more so important when you transition to commercial because you want to treat
yeah,
as many patients as possible, but you want to do it in a cost effective and the most efficient way that you possibly can.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and from a team structure, does that change in terms of what you're looking for in people?
So the team structure you try to build. So when you're getting ready to go from clinical to commercial, you want to make sure you have a team in place
Yeah,
and the right organization in the team before you go commercial, because otherwise it will be a catastrophe if you wait until you get commercial. Like, oh my God, I realized I don't have the right people on my
yeah,
team. I don't have the right
yeah,
organization to support this. So you really want to start building that team and making sure you have the right people in place before you get to the commercial approval, because otherwise you're going to be fighting both now trying to get product out the door and trying to get the right people on the team, and it just ends
yeah,
up being a disaster.
yeah, yeah. Um, Irving, I've absolutely loved this conversation. I suppose what now, looking forward, what are you most excited about for the future?
I'm excited about cell therapy in general. This was actually my fourth cell therapy product coming to approval, so I'm one of the rare people who've actually worked on four cell therapy product. So I'm really excited about looking forward to what's next. What are we going to uncover next in the world of cell therapy that's going to change and transform somebody's life?
Yeah,
It's all about the patient journey and making sure that we're doing the right thing for the patient. There are so many diseases out there and so many cancers out there, and people really need hope and they need for products that are going to be effective and change their life. So
yeah,
I'm excited to work in cell therapy, and I'm excited to be a part of the person who's influencing the rest of the industry and the regulatory bodies to make sure that we can get these products to patient and make sure we get them to them safely, but at a cost-effective way of safety, and making sure that we don't compromise quality and compliance at the same time while operating in the gray.
Yeah, well said. It must be an incredibly fulfilling achievement what you've been through, and you must be extremely proud of not only yourself but your team and the organization, the work that you've done over the last few years, and it all coming to fruition most recently.
And sometimes you don't think about it. It's like,
yeah,
my colleagues have to tell me, Irving, you do realize that you're a rare person now. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
And like, you're the only person probably who's worked on 4 cell therapy products. And I'm like, really? I mean, it just goes so fast that you don't ever stop and think about it. So I think I have to learn to stop and think about everything that I've accomplished and say, wow, this really has happened. I have done this. So
yeah, you've got to enjoy the process and journey of what you've achieved, and take a moment just to take stock and celebrate and celebrate with your family, celebrate with your team and the organization, and hopefully continue to do amazing work for patients. So, Evan, we're going to get into some quick fire questions. So this will be fun.
Let me put on my serious look now.
Yeah, put on your quick fire thinking hat now. Right. What are the 3 most important values that you live and die by?
I think the 3 values that I live by is integrity. I think you always have to be a person of integrity. I think you have to be a person of truth. I think you have to respect people. And I always tell people, never freeze people in time, because we have all made mistakes and we all need a second or third or fourth or fifth chance. So I think that's one of the big things for me, is that really caring about people and trying to understand where they may be coming from, and just always assume good intentions about people. I mean, we're all different, but we're all human. At the end of the day, we're all made the same. We all function the same. Our bodies function the same, even though we may have different personalities. It's just really trying to get to understand the person and be supportive of the person. I think those are the things that I live by. It just drives me crazy when people see somebody and they automatically assume who they are, and they get to know people through other people. That's one of my pet peeves. I always tell people, don't get to know someone through someone else. Get to know that person for yourself, because you never know who that person is. And if you're just listening to somebody else tell you who that person is, you will never get to know that person. You will walk around judging that person based on what somebody else has told you. So that's one of the things that I encourage people not to do.
Brilliant. Do you believe in leaving a legacy?
I do.
And
I
why?
think my legacy for me will be, on my tombstone would probably say, this is a guy who gave his best to make sure that other people got what he didn't get.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Who's been your biggest inspiration in your life? And that could be either personally or professionally.
I think it was actually my high school counselor.
Okay.
And being a person of color, and I actually grew up in the South in a small little place, and he was always encouraging us to think bigger than what we could see, and that we could do what other people were saying that we couldn't do. So that's one of the things for me, being a person of color and being in quality. I'm a rarity. I'm a minority in quality, especially being a man in quality, because quality is really dominated by women, especially not women of color. So I really try to encourage other people of color to get into the sciences, and especially get into quality in the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm always trying to reach back and help somebody to see that they can do this, and it's not as complicated or as difficult. You just have to put your mind to it, and you can succeed if you really want to.
Brilliant. Final question. What one piece of advice would you give to future quality leaders?
My piece of advice would be open to change. I think as in quality, we sometimes get locked into, I've worked in quality in sterile manufacturing. I've worked in quality in non-sterile, and they get caught in that one particular aspect of quality, but quality is much bigger. Quality is really everything. Quality is involved in every aspect of every process. Even if you're not at work, you still have to have a mindset of quality. So I think my advice would be open to everything related to quality, and to just really learn and understand the processes that you're providing oversight for. I can't stress that enough. It worries me that people want to be in quality, they want to release a product, but they never go on the manufacturing floor. They never read a batch record. They never go into the QC lab. They never understand everything that they're trying to be quality oversight for. So I think you really have to have a foundational understanding of the very thing that you're trying to oversee, because otherwise it's going to create this headbutting between you and your customers if you don't understand that.
Yeah. Irving, this has been a fascinating conversation. What a way to kick off the season of the podcast. I really, really appreciate you coming on the show and giving us your time in such a busy period for you.
My pleasure.
I've had a lot of people say to me, you need to get Irving onto the show because he's a fantastic person, fantastic leader, fantastic quality professional, and I think a lot of people will really enjoy this episode and take a lot of value from it. So thanks for your time.
I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me.
No, but my pleasure. And wishing you all the best with things over the coming months in what's an extremely exciting time for you and the organisation.
Thank you.
Cheers, Evan.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to today's show. I hope that you got value from it, whether you're starting your career in quality or if you're at the top of your field. Today's episode was brought to you by RX Group. I'm the founder of RX Group. We are a pharma and biotech recruitment organisation focusing purely on quality assurance. We recruit consultants and senior level permanent quality professionals into the pharma and biotech industry. If we can support you, whether that be in a hiring capacity or if you yourself are looking for work, please get in touch with me on LinkedIn, visit our LinkedIn page where you can subscribe to the podcast, and visit our website www.rx-group.io to find out more about us. See you soon.